Welcome to Latino Public Radio in the 2024 City of Cranston, Rhode Island Republican primary debate. Joining me just days after a successful political barbecue is State Representative Barbara Ann Fenton Fung.
Thanks so much. This will be fun today, Pat.
And conspicuously absent is incumbent Mayor Kenneth Hopkins. Representative Fung, let's get the elephants, if you will, out of the room first. There was an extensive build-up and planning process for this debate. This
Absolutely.
was much anticipated by the Latino community, a growing, increasingly dominant force in Cranston politics. Latino Public Radio is critical in terms of aggressively reaching out to the Latino populations across the state of Rhode Island. And typically, Latino Public Radio is also part of, if you will, the troika of media outlets that conduct high-level debates amongst gubernatorial, congressional, senatorial, virtually at every aspect of public service here in the state. What happened? You were actually approached a while ago to engage with this. Originally,
Yes.
the date was going to be yesterday. There appears to have been some chaos in terms of yesterday, and now today, Mayor Hopkins is a no-show.
Well, and Pat, this isn't the first thing he's no-showed for just in the past few weeks on Latino Public Radio. He no-showed for the political barbecue as well. You know, when we're talking about genuine outreach to the community, it's not showing up when it's convenient for you. And also, too, you've got to keep to your word, okay? We've scheduled 5 different debates over the course of a couple of weeks. These were all well known, and we negotiated with each other and through the station just to make sure that we could find a time that's convenient for everybody. We wanted to make sure that this would all work, and I know that he committed to such, and I did as well. So we keep our word and we show up. When you don't, that's when people know that this is kind of not really that important to you. Okay? He'll show up for some other debates, but for some reason he's pushed off the Latino community right now. And I think we all know why. He sent out a very derogatory mailer just last week that was completely false. But it really used the worst racial tropes when it came to the Latino and other people of color type of communities. That it was basically, Ken's a teacher. And, Ken worked in Cranston East, and he was a PE teacher, and going through the community, he knows how important education is. But for some reason, he put out a mailer that was an absolute disaster. I know you have it there in your hands, accusing me of giving free college education to illegal immigrants. First off, what's pretty funny about this entire mailer is once it hit mailboxes, and everybody kind of looked at it 2 or 3 times, some members of the press reached out to his campaign, and they're like, what is this? Besides being false, what is this? Why are you attacking the Latino community like this? The first thing the campaign did was deny they sent it. That's when you know something's really wrong, okay? Then they said, oh no, she sent out that hit piece on herself, which is hilarious, right?
Right.
And then later in the day, they were forced to admit to another media outlet, like, oh yeah, actually that was us. It says paid for by friends of Ken Hopkins, and it even has the same mail permit number that they use on all of their mailers. So then they had to admit it was them. Then they had to admit that the proof, we call it the citations on the mailer, was just completely false. They actually made this whole thing up. Now, you cover the State House very well. You know how important the House Journal is and whatnot. They made up a day for a House Journal that we weren't even in session. That's a Friday. By covering the State House, we're not there on Fridays.
One Friday a year.
Yes.
It's budget.
It's budget night, right?
That's
Exactly. And so here, they are not afraid to use the Latino community when it suits them, but they'll also they'll attack them the next heartbeat. And that's ridiculous. That's not true engagement. Look, the Latino community in Cranston is so strong and keeps getting stronger. Not only here where we're taping today in the studio over in the Arlington area, but Knightsville, which used to be Little Italy. When we're going door to door, we realized how many new Latino families had moved into the area. Because as other people had moved out, they moved in, they knew that they wanted to have those nice first homes, okay? That a lot of people, just like my husband's family, they started out in Providence.
Right.
My husband grew up in South Providence, and as his family was able to afford a little bit more, they wanted a higher quality of life. And so they moved into Cranston once they could afford it. And, so many other families are following that lead, starting out first generation immigrants in South Providence, and when they can get better schools, safer streets, when they can afford that, they try to move into Cranston. And that's been habitual. We're seeing that. So it's not just in one neighborhood anymore. We're seeing them in Arlington, Knightsville, powerhouses in Edgewood. So for Ken to just kind of blow them off says a lot, and not just once, but twice.
Right, and interestingly, I attended an in-person event last year that was geared towards real estate investors in the state. And if you walked in there with the presumption that those communities, the members there would be largely white, upper middle class, what was astonishing was how many first-generation Latino communities, and there are many Latino communities within the Latino communities. The Dominican Republic, Colombia, Argentina, Venezuela now is becoming prominent in the state. It's a mosaic.
It is. It's a beautiful mosaic. Yeah.
Right, and so those first-generation families, their first step to success is often in the hospitality business and or multifamily real estate. And in doing so, they create a next generation tax base, a next generation community base, and disproportionately the Latino community is directly involved almost instantly in education, in area churches, area fraternal organizations. So it's a critical next step for a community like Cranston to embrace this next generation of wealth. And it's stunning to me because the next thing we have to talk about is the executive order. And coming across with this grotesque generalization that somehow the folks of Brown are storming the barricades here in Rhode Island appeals to really the lowest common denominator.
Yes.
And is he playing to a Republican base with that? Is he?
Oh, please don't put this on the Republican Party. This is just blatant racism. And so many Latino families identify as Republican. We see a lot of people because of their basis in faith, their basis in, a lot of families came over the right. Exactly. They're for, most of the time, like when my husband in the Chinese community, when you came over to this country, you either ran a Chinese restaurant or a laundromat, and so a lot in the Hispanic community too, they open up those first tiendas, right? And they're making sure that their family's growing that small business. Then you see the kids taking over and expanding it.
You've got folks literally just arrived who are fruteros, who are literally on corners funding that first food truck. So we agree that the future of Cranston is this continued infusion of first-generation entrepreneurialism.
Yes.
And this just flies right in the eye of it. Now, it's, again, 2 events in a row. I'm stunned because when looks at the pictures, this is the worst in 1980s style. You've got people crossing a river.
Yeah, and if people haven't seen the mailer, this is what it is. I mean, they're using a picture of people coming across at the southern border, and as if they were going to flood your schools, and we were going to give them all kinds of free things. It's horrible because then we're not even talking about the real issue here. We're talking about education. Okay, right. Now, we always want to make sure that our kids are educated. That's the number one way we break the cycle of poverty. And just to kind of address what's in the mailer, even though he didn't even say it, he's come out after and said, well, you supported the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship. And he tries to think that somehow that would allow people who came here the wrong way to somehow get free tuition. Now, which is just blatantly false. It's so clear he never even read the bill. Okay. My freshman year up at the House, we voted on a bill that removed the end date for the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship. When it was first instituted, it was a pilot program.
The sunset, yeah.
Yeah. And also, we had to correct American with Disabilities Act violation that was accidental in the original bill, and that was corrected in this one. Now, what's really important on that floor debate, if you ever go back and watch it, we were asking CCRI and people who had been in committee, you know what, in this pilot program, are we getting the results we wanted? Are we seeing increased graduation rates in communities of color? Are we seeing those first generation immigrants being able to attend school and get some initial, their first associate's degree, and are they able to move on into different things? Because education breaks the cycle of poverty. We know this. And I remember on the floor, now Secretary of State, but at that point Rep. Greg Amore was like, we all asked that in committee, and we're seeing almost 5-fold increases in that metric, that we were seeing more kids of color finish those 2-year degrees. And that's great. That's what we want to see. Okay, great. So we voted for it. If you actually read the bill, it says that all the students who participate in the program have to comply with the residency policy. Okay, well then you go and read the residency policy, and it says very clearly right there that the student cannot be, or if they're unemancipated, their parents cannot be a non-immigrant alien. Okay, so the whole mailer is blatantly false, just enough it is. But then it kind of keeps going, and then you stop and think, how could a teacher put this out and then trying to slam people for getting education? It's two issues that really conflict at his core, everything he pretends to be. He pretends to be the education mayor. But reality, Pat, you know this, you follow Cranston pretty closely. Our two major high schools, Cranston East and Cranston West, have gone from 4-star schools when my husband was mayor, they're now 2-star schools.
Right.
Now, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, if you were going to relocate your business to somewhere, okay, one of the things I bet you'd be looking at is, hey, how are the local schools? So that my employees and their families, if they were going to come to the city, what are they going to have? So education is also an economic development driver. And when we're seeing those falling rates, it's not because of the teachers and it's not because of the kids. We're seeing Ken, who pretends to be the education mayor, level fund education. Where, look, at the State House, we've increased public funding for education.
And in the city of Providence, they've increased it actually at a rate that exceeds inflation. They found, they found the money.
Yes,
and
because that's what's important to them. That's your priority.
Right.
Yes.
Because the next step post-immigration, post-restaurant, post-multifamily, is that first generation struggles to find a way to get that second generation, if you will, into, the dream for so many mamas and so many is to get that child into a white-collar job, a professional job, all too often realizing that maybe they should have just kept the family business, but it is the next step, because if they're going to grow that family business, the skills that you learn, and folks need to remember that education is not just about going to a tech school. It's about learning to think. It's about becoming stronger in a new language. All of these opportunities are there as a result of the promise, and so I'm just not sure what to say, because this molds into the other elephant in the room, which is what transpired in Cranston City Council just a few weeks ago. Now, full disclosure, I am a principal in an organization called Libertarian Mutual Aid, and one of our biggest projects this time of year is delivering water to homeless encampments. So,
it's great work.
I have a stake, and I won't claim lived experience, but I've spent a couple of years now spending Friday and Saturday evenings underneath some of Rhode Island's finest bridges, and it's horrific.
It's really heart-tagging. I work at the hospital, so I see the effects, obviously, of homelessness and what it has. We see them in the ER all the time. Okay, when the temperatures get cold, they've got issues with frostbite and just general health issues that aren't being addressed.
Right, and so when you approach homeless encampments I quoted as saying that night, just because you take my tent doesn't mean I can afford the rent.
Yeah.
And so when you approach it from that level, and at least not look to what other cities are doing, I have to give credit to Woonsocket, because there are a couple of encampments now which have porta potties, dumpsters. What was particularly insidious about that evening was, number one, it was again the mayor promoting that legislation. That was.
And Pat, maybe we should step back. I'm not sure everybody even knows what that legislation was.
Fair enough. That's a great point. So under the legislation, I'm going to paint a broad picture of it. There would be an ordinance, an attachment to an ordinance in the city laws that would essentially outlaw camping on city properties or erecting structures. That's code words. That's
and they were fine. Right. And they would be fined.
Right.
Yes.
And for the homeless moving there, and there would be a $50 fine, which they went to great pains to say that would be a civil fine. Now we all know what happens. It's called the pipeline of poverty, and it's a slippery slope where you're finding people who have nothing, literally nothing. And so, and understand that when people start out, there's a progression that I've seen all so many times. They finally have to give up their apartment, or maybe it's an addiction issue, and then they're losing their car. Eventually the car is not registered, it gets towed or it breaks down, and then they lose that, and then they get a tent with whatever, and then the tent either falls apart or is ripped out or stolen. There's this whole progression, So you're going to find those people, and when they don't pay those fines, then they're going to find themselves in a situation where they lose their licenses or their ability to get easily identified. They lose all sorts of, and eventually it becomes a criminal prosecution. And so you're essentially criminalizing poverty, when in fact there are other solutions, or at least other attempts at solutions that can be had while we attempt to, as a society, figure out the housing crisis. So this was put up. There were about 20 or so folks who testified, a lot of very poignant testimony. Mm-hmm. It was essentially tabled, but at the end of the presentation, the Cranston police, who I support completely, and I do some amazing work. Yeah. What's happened is Providence's pressures have forced a lot of issues into Cranston. Yep. And there's a migration that's taking place as people just try to figure out where to go. And because there is no place to go. So at the end of the presentation, and I want to be full disclosure on this as well, the Cranston police were prompted to put up a whole set of pictures which were
disturbing,
horrific,
yes,
but quite contemporaneous, quite accurate in terms of the physical conditions. Now, at least they didn't engage in display folks who are living there. Mm-hmm. But this was not noticed on the city council agenda, and that's against the rules. Yeah. And so my organization, the Coalition Radio Network, has actually filed a formal Open Meeting Act violation with the Attorney General, including the videotape of the City Council ordinance meeting, and pointing out that this wasn't noticed. Activists had no opportunity to debate this, and it was injected at the last minute. And all right, so they continue it. Then talk to us about the executive order. Then, as if that's not enough, because that's the agency that's chartered with addressing those issues.
Well, let's kind of walk it back there too, because I know how passionate you are about this issue and everything. So let's break it down to his ordinance first, mm-hmm. Okay? It is completely inhumane to fine somebody $50 when they can't even afford food. Okay?
Right.
That was just, when you put it out there like that, and Ken almost contradicts himself in a way too. There's, going back to around 2021. He kind of folded on the panhandling ordinance that was here in Cranston, okay, and just gave up on that. Now, let's take a look at, from the ordinance that he put in, got so much pushback. Like, there wasn't even a vote to get this into committee initially until they twisted someone's arm. And I think that is a good thing in the sense it reflects everybody's shock that the mayor would think it would be okay to fine homeless people, okay? Now, up at the State House, you know this, you've covered us very well up there, how much money we have set aside to address the housing crisis. Wow. This is an unprecedented amount because it really, every single city and town in Rhode Island right now is dealing with this at some level. Obviously, the urban core has more intense issues at times. Mm-hmm. We're taping this in Arlington. There's a homeless encampment I've been brought down to by the community leaders about half a mile from here.
Right.
Okay. There's people living under the bridge. We have needles everywhere right on the street. You can see them. And mm-hmm. So, if you're a family here, you don't want your kids running around outside like this.
No.
And at the same time, you look at these people who are unhoused, you look at them in the eye, and I just can't say, go move. They're just going to move 3 streets away,
There is no place to go to.
Now, with these record investments that we've made up at the State House, with, our ARPA money, we call COVID money, ARPA money, we're going to be able to build more permanent structures. Now, in Cranston, we have something called Harrington Hall, which is infamous. And it happens to be in my state rep district. Now, Harrington Hall has been colloquially known as the home of the sex offenders. It's a shelter of last resort. And it was usually it was the only shelter that sex offenders, once they left the ACI, serving their sentence, could be registered at. That would be the only way. Now, as soon as I got in, my first meeting was actually with Crossroads, who had just taken over the contract at the time at Harrington Hall. And working with Crossroads, we were able to get the number of sex offenders way down here in Cranston at that Harrington Hall because we were able to find them more permanent housing elsewhere where they would be out near where the services were and whatnot. If you talk to most people in Cranston, they don't want to be down there at Harrington Hall. I mean, there's nothing around there for them that when they're talking about trying to meet with their counselors, trying to meet with their doctors and whatnot. It's very different, okay? They would rather be somewhere else as well. So Crossroads has done a wonderful job. We've been able to find them more permanent housing, and we'll continue to work with our community partners, okay? There's so many community organizations that, by the way they're set up, can maximize federal funding and can maximize state funding, okay? And we can all work together. But that takes a coordinated, proactive effort. And that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened here in Cranston.
So let's look at how your mayoralty would handle that.
Yeah.
So there's organizations that are very well run, like Amos House,
Correct.
House of Hope, CDC, organizations like that. So how would your mayoralty just approach this from the get-go? First of all, would you seek ordinances as a first strike?
Oh, no. And let's take a look. I would approach it completely differently. One of the things I've learned up at the State House, I'm on the Commission for Older Adults. One of the fastest growing homeless populations right now are older adults, okay, as they get pushed out of their homes. They can't afford the constant tax raises. We have that here in Cranston. Taxes have gone up 3 straight years. They can't afford the property insurance rates that keep going up. I was with a woman named Ann. She was in Westwood, and she was telling me, I have to pay somebody to mow the lawn all the time. Like, I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford $50 a week. There's no more neighborhood kids coming around with a lawnmower, or forget plowing snow.
And inflation has decimated the value of their savings.
So we're really worried about them. I want to actually look at the root cause problem. So what I would do, first type of housing, I want to make sure that we have enough single level condos and single level houses where older adults can affordably live. They can enjoy Cranston and worry less. I also want to make sure that we're fostering assisted living and independent living facilities, okay, that are affordable, okay, but also meet their larger needs. And I think that's a good thing. We're working with CCAP and private developers, and we're all, again, rowing in the same direction, taking advantage of some of the record investments that we've made up at the State House. And then when we kind of keep looking at our other housing needs, when it comes to the homeless crisis here, and again, it's not just here in Arlington. There's another encampment in between Knightsville and Dyer, okay? And then there was another encampment just in the news this week over by Stonehill Elementary School, okay? So it's not just one particular area, but that's why I would kind of replicate what I did at Harrington Hall, working with those community housing organizations that can maximize the federal funding, that can maximize the state funding, and make sure that we're moving them into places where they can shower, places where they're safe at night. And that way they can start to get their lives back together, and then we can work with the social workers who are great through the Crossroads or other type of community organizations and start to find them at least part-time employment and then full-time. This is called getting people's lives on track, not just building more shelters and shuttling people around. That's not actually addressing the problem. But I think I'm much more of a bigger picture type of thinker and thinking like, all right, where do we want to be in 4 years? I want to see these numbers way down, but that takes real concerted effort and relying and really working well in a coordinated effort with the council and our community partners to get them into safe places where they can live with dignity.
Is it possible for a city like Cranston, an urban core city, that really encompasses virtually every economic strata?
It does, from west to very rural areas to very, very dense urban on the east side.
Is it possible anymore to just act unilaterally or ignore the problem? Is that possible?
No, and there are brothers and sisters of the world, okay? And at the end of the day, you have to treat every single person, whatever walk of life they come to. You know, I work at our state's major trauma hospital here. That's been my full-time job. I'm a healthcare worker by trade. And you see everybody come through the doors of the ER, okay? I don't care whether you're the governor's family member or the guy who's fallen off the wagon 3 times and is at Providence Rescue Mission, okay? Everybody comes in and you just see them for who they are. They're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter, and then we start working from there. No matter how many times you fall off the wagon, there's always hope, and we try to keep picking people up. And I think that's the way we look at this now. And I think when you have true leadership, it's not coming from an executive order, and it's not coming from an inhumane ordinance. It would be something where we'd work together with the council, where we'd hold workshops, where we bring in the community leaders, where we'd understand the problem in every single different ward, again, different needs in different parts of the city, and then say, hey, look, what do we think we could work with here? But doing it together. When you resort to an executive order, it's because you can't get along with the council and you have to act unilaterally. That's not the way we want this to go. But unfortunately, that's what we've had here in Cranston. The chaos and the rancor. You'll appreciate this. The council and the administration just absolutely can't stand each other. They swear at each other at the meetings. It's actually embarrassing at many levels. And now, just because you have political differences, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, who cares? Big deal, right? But they hate each other so much that they left $8 million on the table for a community center, okay? They didn't trust each other. The council said, I don't trust you to execute this well. I mean, when you hate each other so much that you're hurting the city to the tune of $8 million that we can't get back now, okay? The deadline's way past. For a community center that would have focused on improving health initiatives, that would have helped with education, especially adult education. You really need to check yourself at the door. So I would, I see a lot of, Ken Hopkins' kind of motto is proven leadership. This is really failed leadership. And failed leadership for not showing up tonight, and failed leadership for his record for the past 4 years.
If folks are just joining us, this is Latino Public Radio. We are hosting a debate between incumbent Mayor Ken Hopkins, who elected not to be here this evening, and State Representative Barbara Ann Fenton Fung, who is running in the Republican primary. So you've got, this is the first step, if you will.
It's step one. Step one.
And the gentleman who's running is also a city council member, and not to be, folks think Cranston is a Republican town. That's simply not true anymore.
Well, I will say this. We tend to elect Republican mayors, okay? The council tends to flip back and forth.
Right.
When my husband first became mayor, he had a 9-0 Democratic council, okay? That didn't matter. They worked together and got big things done, okay? They started tackling the city's pension crisis. They did that. They solved some of those pension issues, which, historically, if you put broad strokes, that's hard for Democrats to touch. But working with my husband, they worked with the unions. They actually got concessions from them. This is when everybody's rowing in the same direction to tackle big issues. They got it done under my husband, and I kind of take the same tactic as well. That, look, these are big problems. Buddy Cianci famously said, there's no Republican way to pick up a trash can, and there's no Democratic way to plow snow. And so when we're looking at the city and where we want it to be, we have to make sure that we're all working together and kind of to check the other labels at the door.
Folks who aren't close watchers, if you will, of Cranston politics, and to a certain degree, there is a media pecking order. Providence, of course,
has got the major issues, yes, and
as if no one else does. Right? And then there's work, and then there's Cranston, and everyone ignores Woonsocket and Pawtucket, much to them. But folks who live outside of Cranston were surprised to see you step away from an incumbency at the General Assembly to go to an executive role. Now, I guess my first question, and I would ask the same question to Mayor Hopkins if he was here.
If he was here, yes.
Right. Talk about those two different approaches, but also talk about the potential for your experience working in a overwhelmingly Democratic legislature, right? And your ability to get things done, and how you would transport that experience to a city.
Yeah, I think that's important. So we've talked about this a little bit before. I love being at the State House. I think we've gotten some really great big issues we've started to tackle, especially when it came around healthcare. All right, so many people, we used to hear it at the doors all the time. I can't afford my co-pays for my medications. And you know what happens when they run out of their medications? They end up in the emergency room with all of us, costing the state even more. We were able to actually limit co-pays. So things like insulin, life-saving medications, all those co-pays are capped now. That was a great thing. I was also a co-sponsor of civics education. I think it's really important that all of our kids going through public school understand how our government works and how to engage in it. It's so cool. You've been up there when different students are coming up and testifying on bills that really they're passionate about.
I tell kids all the time, you can't fight for your civil rights if you don't understand them.
Yeah, and so that was one of my first bills that I co-sponsored, and it was so great to see that pass over the finish line. And I also, with Sandra Cano, a very well-known senator here on Latino Public Radio, she's phenomenal. I was able to work across the aisle with her, and we were able to put in, for the first time, a requirement that every public school student learns about Asian American history and Asian American culture. Okay, we had done that. Anastasia Williams had done that for Black Americans the year before. We had pushed it through for Asian Americans because we think it's important that chapters of our nation's history that quite simply sometimes get missed, that we were including them, okay, in the big education system. Because when you learn about a culture, whether it's the Latino culture, Caribbean, when it comes to our Asian Americans, it's so important because then you're less afraid of the unknown. We saw a lot of the anti-Asian bias that happened during COVID, and a lot of people were like, they didn't know a whole lot about the Asian American experience. And so that was a really important bill that I worked really well with Sandra Cano to get that over the finish line. But why did I come back home to Cranston? Well, look, I didn't think that we'd do this quickly, but what we saw in Cranston was a city that, was clicking on all cylinders back in 2018, 2019, 2020. People knew that there was just this sense of vibrancy and working together. And that was just not happening anymore. We thought that Ken, who again isn't here tonight, would use his coaching skills and be able to work well with the council. That was our hope, okay, and bring it forward. And he didn't do that. One of the first things that happened when he became mayor is he lost control of the city council because he couldn't get along with a Republican councilman, okay? They were fighting at each other, accusing each other of all kinds of things, probably most of which actually happened. And then that Republican councilor, Mr. Ferry, switched parties, and then he lost control of the council, and things started spiraling from there. Right. Mr. Ferry's actually running in the Democratic contest. It all comes full circle. Then we heard that Ken wasn't showing up to work. And all the city workers would kind of whisper in our ear, like, Barb, he's not there. And we're like, what do you mean he's not there? Is he out at events or whatnot? And he's like, no, he just doesn't show up for days at a time. So there was a public records request. We got his official calendars. Okay? There's almost absolutely nothing on his calendar the first year, almost like he didn't keep a calendar. And then from the part that he did forward, so like December of 21 forward, when we analyzed his calendar, there's absolutely nothing on it 40% of the time. Okay? So he's basically a part-time mayor taking a full-time salary. Right. And that's just not what the city of Cranston needs. Now, what has happened? Well, he's not been tending the shop. Cranston's gone from the second largest city to the third largest city. We talked about the issues with the schools, going from 4-star schools to 2-star schools. And he's obviously not there at work minding the finances, because despite a $42 million golden parachute, he's raised taxes 3 straight years. Plus, this year we had the reeval, so it's almost a double hit for some people. One of our neighbors went up $1,500 in 1 year alone.
Which then spirals into the circle of poverty.
Well, we were just talking about earlier.
Yeah. Folks who have multi-generational legacies here in the city are now being forced to leave. Yes. Which, of course, when you talk about that first year, one of the most hackneyed questions in politics is, what will you accomplish your first 100 days? Let's talk about, in light of everything you've said, let's talk about relationships. What type of relationships will you build in that first 100 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important that we're all considering ourselves Team Cranston, okay? No matter if you're the most progressive Democrat or the most conservative Republican. Because, look, there's 3 main things I want to get off the ground quickly. I want to start building a health and biomed sector. Use some of those biomed initiatives we set aside at the State House to attract those companies of the future. Great paying jobs. There's a whole corridor in Cranston, Elmwood and Wellington, which kind of more industrial areas, but it's ripe for revitalization. This is an area that we could really spruce up and raise the bar.
And that's the forgotten area of Cranston, because people think of Cranston, they think of
Garden City, yeah.
They think of, Top Golf and all these other wonderful things that are happening. Yep. But you've got an industrial base in Cranston that appears to, at least to an outsider, as vastly undercapitalized, vastly underused. And ripe for, based on its proximity to Providence and highways, ripe for development and ripe for increasing the tax base, thus alleviating pressure, potentially, hopefully at least, off the senior citizens and young people that you need to bring into the city.
Cranston has the 4th highest property tax burden, here in the entire state. And so that's really stressing us out. We've talked about it before at many different levels. So getting that sector in kind of an economic investment zone going, we'll work with that first. Now, the other 2 areas I really want to tackle is getting a real good plan and moving forward. We're talking about resiliency and flooding. Cranston is flooding in areas that have never flooded before. And that's because our infrastructure is very old. Those pipes are built in the 50s and 60s. And the one thing I can't stand, and I'm sure it irritates a lot of people too, is when we go and we rip up a road to repave it, Okay, and then we do it nice, it's all pretty, we seal it back up, and then a year later the water company comes in and they want to do some work like
Right.
that. When we open up a road, I want to take advantage of all the state money we set aside to replace the lead pipes. We did over $100 million we set aside at the state level.
Senator Ruggiero's landmark legislation.
Absolutely, and that's really important. We have a ton of lead pipes all across Cranston, places you didn't think. Now, while we're down there, let's upgrade the drainage infrastructure, okay? And then seal everything back up. Not this piecemeal approach, which happened on Park Avenue over the past year, which decimated so many small businesses on that side.
Right, I was in Cranston trying to find a place over. I was actually over by the St. Mary's Feast building, and it's just
Constantly.
yeah, it's moonscape.
And so just think about it. It's hard for us to drive through. You're not looking to maybe go shop there, okay? So all those small businesses are being hurt by prolonged. Now, I'm all for construction and upgrading our infrastructure, but we have to make sure that we're doing it in an efficient manner and not hurting those small businesses habitually. And that takes just coordination, and that takes people being at work. Again, if your mayor isn't showing up for work, they're not leading the charge, okay? So flood mitigation, big issue for me. And then the other one too is speeding and road safety. Okay, we hear that complaint all the time at the doors. We don't have enough enforcement, but it's not just having police officers there writing tickets every once in a while. That's not what it is. It's really awesome when I was part of a national cohort of state legislators, okay, for Safe Street legislation. That's become the new buzzword. But really it's an entire program of working with changing the shape of curbing sometimes at intersections to slow people down, the different use of lights, the different use of street art, and
Traffic calming techniques instead of
just constant enforcement. But it's all, you know, a big program together. In Quebec, they're using these different types of lights that, think of big speedways like Budlong Road or Broad Street, okay? People just fly down 60 miles an hour, and these are in neighborhoods where there's lots of kids. It's actually kind of fools your head. So when it detects you like a speed, like we have those signs that say, hey, you're going too fast, you're going 60. They use that same technology, but the traffic light attached to it changes from green to yellow to red, depending on how fast you are.
Right.
You just instinctively go to stop. And then as you get your speed back under control, it goes up again. They're using that in Quebec. I bet we could try to pilot some of those programs.
Well, the other opportunity too is not to get too much into the weeds on traffic control, but you know, angled parking as opposed to parallel parking.
They did that in Newport. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
By definition, if your goal as a city is to make it walkable, because that was going to be my next question, because Cranston, one of the beauties of Rhode Island is so many of the cities are cities still of neighborhoods. You know, very distinct perspectives, cultural outlooks, multi-generation inhabitants, and that's attractive for people to visit. You know, quite frankly, the best Italian food in the state is not on Federal Hill anymore.
It's not.
It's in
here.
Niceville, yeah.
It's here. I got to be honest, and it's because a lot of families moved out, right? They wanted to come here for a better quality of life. One of the things when it comes when we're talking about walkable cities, okay, we take a look about, are these cities, we call them age-friendly, okay? So can you walk them not only when you're healthy and in your 30s and 40s and 50s, but think of the individual who's 70 years old, okay?
Right.
We were just talking with one of the residents of Knightsville Manor, okay, which again, lives at big tower right there in the middle of Knightsville. They ripped up all these brand new sidewalks to put in decorative sidewalks, which has irritated a lot of other parts of the city who just want one sidewalk to begin with, but we'll leave that where it is. But the decorative sidewalks they put on is this stamped concrete, okay? And unfortunately, the ridges, people's walkers are catching on them, okay? One person almost fell the other day.
And if you're in some type of assisted wheelchair.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which most of these residents are, you know, using a cane. These are things that are just not thought through. Sometimes they can look pretty, but are they functional for that neighborhood? All right. Now, we'll talk about Rolfe Square. Rolfe Square has so much potential. And Ken did, he replaced some sidewalks there and crosswalks, and that's fine. But what they haven't done, what he doesn't get about Main Street development, is that then you have to do things like what Federal Hill Association has done very well. Having the outdoor concerts, having al fresco dining, and bringing more business into those restaurants. Not just a once or twice a year, like a street vendor fair. That's great for the street vendors. That's not great for King's Garden or Alani's, a Mediterranean
Well,
deli.
it leads to a question that I love asking, particularly at the gubernatorial level, because it's profoundly uncomfortable. Economic development.
Yep.
Is it economic development intended to assist the people who have lived here for generations, have businesses already in place, or is it for the people that, well, quite frankly, they want to replace us with?
So, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the second part of your question, but let's tackle the first part here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, when you come in and you take a look at a place like Rolf Square with some businesses that have been there for decades, okay, they're like, hey, look, we've been doing the right thing. Why can't we get a break? We don't want to create programs that only incentivize new businesses to come in, but it has to be a much more holistic approach to make sure that the businesses there not only can stay there, but can grow, all right, and be even more successful. So, we have 3 main villages here in Cranston. We have Knightsville, Rolf Square, and Patuxent. They're pretty much in a line, right up and down Park Avenue there. Now, that's so important to our long-term stability. We might, when Alan was able to recruit Topgolf to the city, wonderful. We knew that would be a big boost.
Do you think he gets enough credit for that?
I don't think he gets any credit for it. You wouldn't know that. No, the current mayor said he brought them in, but it's laughable. Everybody on the council who was there at the time, remember that Ken Hopkins was actually very resistant and fought everybody on Topgolf coming into the city. But you know what? Alan's not about getting the credit. I'll be honest. People who were there remember how much work he did to bring them in. Now, big deal. I think the big thing is that Cranston's succeeding, all right? But when we have those large companies coming in now, look, Citizens Bank built a new, huge complex in Johnston. They closed many facilities throughout the state and went there. You've got to make sure that, say you lost a company here, that we still had everything else clicking in all directions, and that you had a strong economic development team who was ready to come in and market that area to the next 2 or 3 businesses. Because you know what makes the city attractive is that when they see a functional government, they don't want to see what's going on right now with the city council swearing at the administration and back and forth, okay? One suing each other, it's complete rancor. If you're a business or you're an entrepreneur, you don't want to come into Cranston right now because this is what you see, all right? You also need to have a much stronger economic development team. When my husband was mayor, they used to have like a one-stop shop. So you're coming in, hey, look, I want to do this here in Cranston. Here's my design. And they would be able to work with you right there. Oh, well, fire might have a problem with this, or let's talk with DEM about drainage issues here. And that's not happening in Cranston right now. So what has happened? Let's take Rolf Square for an example. There's a brewery, it was a big write-up in Projo last year, that has been stuck for years in this endless cycle of permitting quagmire. Mm-hmm. Young entrepreneurs cannot front rent for 6, 8, 12 months or longer. And when you have a permitting issue, you can't just continue or push it down the line to the next meeting, or let's work on this next month. That doesn't happen. That's a death knell to small businesses. So I want to have a very well-connected economic development director who will just be super aggressive, working with these small businesses and bringing them along in a way that we just don't see currently.
Right. So you envision as a team approach. Are you willing to bring in outsiders from the business community, the educational community?
Yes.
I think we've gotten past that one dictatorial mayor. It's worked a couple of times. More often than not, it hasn't.
Exactly.
It's actually quite often fails more often than it's successful. So what type of people will then, and I just want to mention for a second, I wish I was able to have these kind of conversations with the mayor. I just have to throw that out there because there's certain things he's done that I've been a fan of. And I've attended City Hall and I've been at press conferences. And I got to tell you, it's frustrating as hell that
he's a no-show?
That this kind of dynamic, because right now, I'm going to step aside and break through the fourth wall, right? And your focus is entirely on policy. Yeah. And that's what people like me want to talk about. So what type of skills are you going to bring? You've got, let's look at your major challenges. You've got public safety issues that have a lot to do with the maniacal driving. I refer to Route 10, I hope you don't mind, as Jersey Shore meets, what was it, Death Speed Auto or whatever that game is.
Is it that bad? I don't know. All right. I'll leave it for you.
I drive in the state a lot. I'm all
you do.
over the state. And that whole Route 10 corridor is just chaos. And for the record, I used to drive a truck in New York City.
Oh,
So
well, okay, you have some experience.
I'm not shy about that. So you've got a public safety issue there. That's a combination of addressing the outward appearance and the impact of homelessness living on the street, homeless people living in the streets, and you've got the driving. And then you've got economic development issues, which, the competition that we've seen in past years between municipalities is only going to explode now as the economy slows down.
Yes.
And then you've got education. So what are some of the type of people that you'd like to incorporate into Fenton Fund administration?
So I'm not afraid to hire people who are smarter than me. I don't need to surround myself with yes men. If you look at the current mayor's administration, they're nice people, okay, but they're not brought in for their expertise. In fact, if you look at the third floor of the mayor's suite there, it's pretty much just his friends and drinking buddies, okay? Now, let's go back one step and say when we're talking about education, I would love to see people who not only not just teachers, but also really skilled administrators who have turned around, different municipalities and said, hey, look, let's think outside of the box, all right? And where can we get you? And I'll say this, just because something is a little stale right now doesn't mean we just throw everything out. No, I'm not a type of person that says, oh, we got to eliminate everything. I want to work with the people who are there right now and say, what skill set are we missing, okay? Now, I'll give the superintendent credit. Cranston had a major problem with attendance. This isn't unique to them and many other
Right.
communities or whatnot. And that actually affects the business of education because, as you know, the education funding formula, which is the state giving money to the cities and towns to help fund public education,
Right.
is based on how many students are attending the schools, and
Who
attendance is
actually
important.
show up, yeah.
Right, and during COVID, we know we had a big problem with attendance. All right, now, the first year or two coming out of COVID, those attendance rates were way off as well. For 1 year, I believe it was almost 1,100 off. Now, that would have meant an enormous hit to Cranston's finances when we're talking about funding education. And, up at the State House, myself and other state reps, we for a couple years there, we were able to say, we'll hold you harmless and we'll use the pre-COVID numbers. But you got to work on getting this up. The superintendent did a good job. She brought somebody in who was really focused on, he's called the Dean of Attendance, okay, and breaking through barriers. Why aren't the kids getting to school? And he's become a trusted member. So it's always trying to think outside the box. What are we going to do to fill in our needs here? But with education, I want to expand our career tech opportunities, all right? I think we've got some pretty good starting points. We have the Laborers Charter School. We have other career tech pathways like the medical pathways that have been brought online. And we're trying to look at what are the jobs of the future. A lot of this comes down to like STEM type of career pathways and making sure we're not only just putting that in the high school level, but that we're incorporating them in the middle school level and the elementary to get these kids excited about education and go forward. So I want to bring in people who are in the private sector and kind of in that STEM area, whether it's Electric Boat, where it's some of the defense companies down there. We want these kids to stay in Rhode Island. I want to make sure there's a career pathway straight out of there. When it comes to businesses, I want to bring in, people who are very experienced. I want a lot of gray hair, in my administration. People who have been there and done that and brought in that type of skill set where they now want to just give back and change the community. I want people who have done it many different ways, not just learned about it in a textbook. I want to see people who are out there and bring in very different type of industrial businesses, all right? I don't want to just have just a manufacturing perspective or just a hospitality,
Right.
okay? And I think I'll create a mayor's council of business leaders to really just sit down with us and say, hey, look, these are my needs, this is where I'd go. So maybe they're not always formal parts of the administration from a paid salary perspective, but that they're at the table with me, kind of guiding.
You develop people who have a vested interest in the success of the city. And Electric Boat, you name them, they've been particularly aggressive with area school departments in having a portal, because they see, quite frankly, their ability
That's
to
their new
succeed.
workforce.
Right.
That's their workforce.
And for a couple of years now, it's been troubled. They haven't had people with the fundamental skill sets in order to move into those jobs. So some of these large companies are willing to shoulder
Yes.
a great deal of the training costs, because at least then they'll be able to have some function of control.
And also making sure that they're coming out with skill sets they need. I remember a couple years ago when Electric Boat was like, look, we need to upskill the workforce very quickly here, all right? Because we are getting these enormous contracts from the federal government. And to stay here in Rhode Island, we need to have people who can meet those skill sets. And
Right.
sometimes they're non-traditional, but I think working through different things. And look, we want to make sure that we're offering really high quality AP courses as well. We've got a lot of kids that have great dreams of going on to Ivy League schools and some of the great universities, okay? We want to make sure that we're seeing the high school scores elevate from 2 to 3 to 4. One of the big issues that have been brought up a lot is that our multi-language learners are still struggling, okay? And sometimes that can affect the scoring system. So what did we do at the State House? We got more money for multi-language learners, and we were able to bring it back. And so I want to see that being used really well and correctly. And, and trying to get things moving on all levels. We have a problem, we identified it, we found the funding to save it.
Where do you stand on the great challenge in the educational space, of course, is charter schools versus conventional
I think
public schools?
there's room for all. I want public schools to be everybody's first choice, okay? And that means, up at the State House, we sponsored the school bond so that if everything is executed correctly, the state's going to pick up like 70% of the costs to replace these schools. We're right here in Arlington, we've combined Gladstone and Arlington, trying to get a much bigger, a nice, wonderful school, safe, really will excite the kids for the future. There was obviously, we built a whole new school over in Garden City, which combined Waterman and Garden City. We're investing in the Laborers Charter School. We've worked on Eden Park. So there's a lot of different programs that we want to do. Now, by doing that, we're trying to elevate public education. Okay, there's still obviously the room for more non-traditional settings. Okay, that some kids just need a longer school day. Okay, some need a very non-traditional type of classroom.
Right.
But let's make sure that can level funded education. If you're the education mayor, you shouldn't be level funding education. The state, delegation came in and saved the day there. But I want to make sure that money isn't just, kind of falling by the wayside. I want to see targeted investments in our future. Like I said, when we talk about multi-language learners, there was a problem we identified. We went and got the funding. Now I want to see how we're going to use that correctly to raise our scores and raise our kids' performance.
Now, look at a city like Pawtucket. Pawtucket has essentially in the process of renewing their entire school facility stock. I mean, they're.
I don't know too much about Pawtucket, so I'll take your word for it.
But they've done an astonishing job of leveraging state monies to the tune of potential up to 90% reimbursement on some of these. They're coming up. They've got the last major school in the pipeline is this Unified High School, which would be where McCoy is. Do you feel? I got a couple education questions. Do you feel like Cranston's gotten their share of state money?
Well, I think we do a really good job, especially when it came to the infrastructure. Okay, 72% reimbursement if everything goes well is very high compared to so many other communities. Some are as low as 30%. So yes, we're doing well there. And the state delegation, I remember when I was running against the speaker, okay, back in 2020, one of the major hits against me was, oh, you'll never get rid of the car tax, okay? Well, we got rid of the car tax and we got rid of it a year early because we had the great relationships with the entire team up there, Republican and Democrat. When it comes to education, everybody was worried. They're like, well, what does this mean we're not going to get the increases in education? We've gotten increases in education 3 straight years, okay? So that's what we're doing to move the ball forward up from the state delegation, bringing him back home to Cranston. Now, I think, obviously we ask the state delegation to keep fighting, and especially when we're coming to those targeted needs. Multi-language learners, we increased that, we created a whole new category, okay, to make sure that we're increasing their funding. But one of the other issues, and you know this well covering the State House, is the transportation, okay? Cranston school transportation right now, a lot of families are very upset at the mayor because of lack of funding right now. They're seeing some cuts with, how many bus stops there are and bus riding all, different parts of the community. So that's become a thing that's flared up in the past few weeks too. But we'll see. We created a whole legislative commission up there at the State House to figure out what we have to do to properly fund school bus transportation around the state. And so I'll be really interested in how that comes forward and what we're going to be able to do to try to deliver more from the state level to help the cities.
Now I'm going to divert a little bit because you brought up transportation. As we affectionately call it at the Coalition Radio Network, the RIPTR. The RIPTR has suffered. You've got, on one level, you've got the Commerce Corporation, which seemingly can get tens of millions of dollars. And RIPTR is fighting literally for its survival, it would seem at times. Yeah. Cranston is a city that there's certainly, I wouldn't say it depends, but mass transportation is an integral part of Cranston life, particularly in the communities that maybe are a step down the economic ladder. In fact, RIPTA is the only way that they can. Are you, based on your State House relationships and your working knowledge of that situation, what are you prepared to do to fight to get RIPTA fully funded, or at least legitimately funded?
Well, and one of the ways I think that RIPTA should really look at their service routes and everything. Remember, they were trying to cut routes, and we were able to save that funding this year up at the State House, and so everything kind of stayed as is. But the status quo at RIPTA isn't going to survive for the next 3 to 5 years coming around. I think we should take a look at RIPTA's service in a way of look at it from an economic development standpoint. Okay, if I'm a senior living in Auburn, let's say, so kind of in the middle of the city, and I can't afford a car, what kind of transportation would take me to Knightsville? What type of transportation would take me to Patuxent Village so I can enjoy those restaurants with my family? Right now, there's nothing, okay? In Newport, they've done a great job with these little trolley cars, okay? Again, kind of fixed with the period down there, but they go for short routes. Could we have a route up and down Park Avenue connecting all 3 major village hubs? And then maybe could it swing down to Garden City as well? Could we do more? Instead of having these long bus routes that go all the way up to Kennedy Plaza and then come down the other side of the city, could we be more strategic about that? Did I just knock Ken over? All right, sorry. I just elbowed him in the head, I think. But could we actually use, like, again, whether it's vans, trolleys, something like that, the smaller buses, to, again, provide more frequent transportation to not only get back and forth to the villages, but then, let's make sure they can get to work. If you're going to Taco, if you live in Edgewood right now, and you work at Taco, you'd have to go all the way into downtown Providence, switch buses, and then come all the way back out. Yeah.
And it's become increasingly obvious that in the scheme of Rhode Island, we think of ourselves as a sovereign nation. I understand that, and I'm fine with that. But
Banana Republic sometimes. So yeah,
something like that. But there has to be a close working relationship. It's a city-state phenomenon. Yeah. And there has to be a close working relationship with the town council, the mayor, and the state delegation, and largely the federal delegation. And again, you see the advantage. Right now we've got superpowers in the Senate who bring literally bazillions of dollars into the state. Yeah. But in the absence of that working relationship, is the state too Providence-centric with regard to a lot of its services? And I know we've only got a few minutes left, so.
So, as the city of Cranston goes, as the city of Providence goes, so goes the state. That's kind of the way it says. So we have to make sure that Providence is succeeding, right? Mm-hmm. But when it comes to Cranston, we also want to make sure, look, we used to be the 2nd largest city. Now we're just the 3rd largest. So I want to bring that back up and grow the city again. And part of that really is, when we're looking at transportation, making sure that this works. This works for everybody. And I like your point where you have to work not only with your council people, but with your state delegation, with the federal delegation. This current mayor doesn't work with us at all. In fact, pushes us away when we're trying to be helpful. I think that's been a complaint of many of us, at least on the House side, up at the state level, is we're not nearly engaged enough when we try to bring money back. We brought back a grant for $10,000 for Cranston Police Department, okay? But I was told, you can't deliver that because you're running against the mayor. Okay, that kind of, when we're creating barriers, even when I bring back look, we've delivered legislative grants, not only for the youth sports organizations, for arts organizations, but we've also been able to deliver for the senior center. We've been able, like we said, for the police department. We brought back funding for our public libraries so that we can have English language classes and citizenship classes. And those are the type investments that we want to bring back to our city. That's what the state delegation can deliver on a more consistent basis on top of all the other funding. It's the little details. And I think being able to work together as a team and kind of, again, like I've said earlier, check the labels at the door. I think that's when you've got a thriving Cranston, and then everybody wins. Okay? Right now, it's a lot of petty nonsense.
We've only got a minute or so left. So this is right out of the interview. Well, it was supposed to be a debate, but
it
turned into a conversation. I think a very good one, by the way.
Thank you.
If you will, in the last minute or so, speak to the Latino Public Radio audience. Talk about, we focused early on some of the negatives, but what your administration would represent in opportunities to folks, we'll call it in the community, in the Latino Public Radio community.
Well, and I think it's always so important that, look, when my husband was mayor, He had the first ever Latino chief of staff. He had the first woman director of administration. He had the first visually impaired solicitor. It was just, there were a lot of firsts. He was also the first mayor of minority status, minority color. So I think what worked really well there is it wasn't just checking a box. It wasn't like, oh, I have somebody of Latino background here, great, done. It's consistent engagement in the community, and that's what's really important. When I was a state rep, I was at everything, every different event in art, from sports to arts to whatnot, and that's what I'll bring as mayor, because I actually value your opinion, I respect your opinion, and I'm willing to say that I don't know everything about every situation, and I'm always dying to learn more. Now, here in Cranston, it sounds kind of cliche-ish, but as I go more to door in different neighborhoods, they keep saying, you know, when your husband was mayor, things were happy, things were working. And now we know that that's not there anymore. And so we're going to work really hard. We're going to bring back the times of funk. Yes, we'll talk about the biomed initiatives and we'll talk about flooding, but we're going to make sure that we do it with full honesty and full transparency. And we're just going to work harder than you've ever seen us before to raise the bar here and deliver city services that exceed your expectations. And that's what when I look back at the next 4 years and hopefully the next 8 under my administration, I'd be like, hey, that's what I'd be proud of. All right, those are the goals that I set. That we did everything. No matter the little policy bumps, we know there will be things that'll come out of left field. But are we going to take a city that is struggling right now in terms of morale, and are we going to bring it back to not only just the way it was in my husband, but I'm pretty competitive, so we're going to try to raise the bar even on him. And, and just say like, hey, look, we're a city firing on all cylinders. Not only do you want to move in here, but you want to bring your business here as well. You say, hey, you know what? I'm proud to be a Cranstonian again. That would be the success.
Excellent. We have been speaking with Rhode Island State Representative Barbara Ann Fenton-Fung. She is a candidate for the Republican nomination for the mayoralty of the city of Cranston. Again, my regrets that the current mayor, the current incumbent, decided not to spend time with us again for the second time this week, and just reflect briefly on the importance of that decision, if you will, to the constituency of Latino Public Radio. My name is Pat Ford. I want to thank Latino Public Radio for the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've seen substance tonight as opposed to some of the political handicapping that goes on in these conversations. It's been all about policy, but that's what we do here. Thank you very much for joining us. And
I'm going to do one more thing. Reminder, please vote September 10th. I appreciate your vote.
There's a September 10th primary, just a week and a half away from the date of this taping. Folks, you need to engage.
Yes, and I would appreciate your consideration and hopefully your vote come September 10th. Thank you.
Thank you very much.